You don't feel it when the system defeats you. There are no sirens, no warning. There's only a silent instant when the dashboard light comes on and something inside you realizes you've lost control not of the car, but of your own life. Machiavelli would understand this moment better than any modern economist. He would say it wasn't the engine that failed, but your position on the invisible chessboard. That red warning light isn't a mechanical defect, it's the signature of your social vulnerability, the seal of your strategic fragility. You know the repair costs $300. You also know there's only 42 in your account. At this point, the mind doesn't reason, it defends itself. You turn up the radio volume, as if you could silence reality. You ignore the metallic creaking as if avoiding looking a predator in the eye. This small, almost imperceptible gesture is the first move in a game you've already lost. Machiavelli taught that the fatal error is not making a mistake, but pretending not to make one. Whoever denies their own weakness surrenders power to the enemy before the battle even begins. 2 months later, you're stranded on the side of the road, smoke billowing from the hood and a cold emptiness in your stomach. Now the cost isn't $300 anymore. It's towing, a destroyed transmission, lost wages, silent shame. The final number 2,500 just hurt your wallet. It's etched into your psyche like a sentence you didn't fail through irresponsibility, but through a lack of room for maneuver. Machiavelli would call this a loss of position. You didn't fall because you stumbled, you fell because you were in the wrong place, surrounded by forces that never worked in your favor. The financial world sells a comforting lie that wealth is the fruit of virtue and poverty is the fruit of vice. As if discipline could resolve structural asymmetries. Machiavelli would never accept this moralistic tale. For him, life is a field of forces, and whoever does not see the invisible vectors is crushed by them. He would understand that it is not a matter of character, but of architecture. The human mind is molded by the environment like incandescent iron in a mold. When the environment is one of scarcity, the mind becomes short-sighted, reactive, trapped in the present. There's an equation no one teaches you because it doesn't appear in self-help books. Poverty isn't just the absence of money, it's the constant presence of cost. Every decision is more expensive for those without savings. Every mistake is multiplied. Machiavelli spoke about how fortune favors those already at an advantage and disregards those who lack the structure to absorb shocks. What you experienced on the side of the road wasn't an isolated misfortune, it was the exact manifestation of what he described centuries ago. Those without power are forced to always play at a disadvantage, paying an invisible price simply for existing. Observe what happens inside your head when your balance approaches zero. Your thinking narrows, your horizon disappears. You don't plan, you react. You don't build, you put out fires. This mental state is the true prison. Machiavelli would say that you have been domesticated by fear, trained by the repetition of scarcity to accept crumbs as your maximum limit. You are not just short of money. You lack mental time, strategic energy, and the necessary composure to observe the game from the outside. Ask yourself, when was the last time you made a decision without feeling the weight of urgency crushing your shoulders? When was the last time you chose something thinking about the total cost of your life and not just the monthly payment? These questions aren't moral, they're tactical. Because those who decide under pressure don't decide, they merely survive. And those who live only to survive never threaten the system that oppresses them. Machiavelli taught that true power is not manifested in force, but in the precise reading of hidden mechanisms. His failure was not ignoring the noise of the engine. It was ignoring the noise of his own social position grinding from within. Every tax, every interest rate, every small cost that explodes later is a coded message: you have no margin, no buffer, no protection. You are naked on a battlefield where everyone else wears armor. And this is where dark psychology comes into play. The system doesn't need to push you. It just tires you out enough that you sabotage yourself. You believe it's bad luck. It knows it's strategic exhaustion. You believe it was a one-off mistake. It knows it was the predictable result of an equation designed long before you entered the game. But there is something Machiavelli never accepted: passivity in the face of one's own position. He didn't speak of justice, he spoke of efficiency. He didn't promise comfort, he promised clarity. And clarity begins when you understand that the red light on the dashboard isn't a mechanical warning. It's a symbol. A silent omen that your place in the invisible hierarchy is charging you interest. You're not broken because you don't try hard enough. You're broken because you haven't yet learned to see the big picture. And as long as you keep confusing survival with strategy, you'll continue to pay dearly for every small mistake. The real question isn't how much it costs to fix the engine. The question is how much longer will you allow the game to be played against you without even knowing the rules. You don't realize the exact moment you start paying more for everything. It doesn't arrive as an explicit charge. It doesn't appear as a warning on the bank screen. It infiltrates small, almost invisible gestures, like the quick trip to the corner store because your salary only arrives on Friday, or the automatic choice of the smaller, more expensive version because the money left over doesn't allow for thinking about stockpiling, about the long term, about tomorrow. Machiavelli would understand this mechanism as one of the most refined forms of domination when the oppressed believe they are choosing, but are only reacting to the siege. Consider the banal scene of buying toilet paper. It's not about the paper itself, it's about position. Someone who enters a wholesale store pushes a heavy cart, pays 50 reis, and leaves stocked for months. Someone struggling financially enters the corner store and buys a 4-pack for 16. The cost doesn't hurt immediately, but it repeats itself every week like a slow bleeding. At the end of the month, the person who couldn't hold back money in stock paid triple for the same product. Machiavelli would say this is the silent tribute levied on those who lack the capital to move. There is no visible villain, only mathematics functioning as an instrument of power. And the most insidious thing is that this spreads like a fog throughout the daily routine. The small jar of mayonnaise that costs almost the same as the large one. The detergent bought unit by unit. The diaper purchased in an emergency, at 3 in the morning, when the baby cries and the only open store is the most expensive in the neighborhood. Each of these scenes seems isolated, but together they form a pattern of wear and tear that silently erodes income. You look back and don't understand where the money went. It was dissolved into the invisible tax of not being able to buy better. Machiavelli taught that the most efficient power is not that which oppresses with violence, but that which creates conditions in which the dominated exhaust themselves. Economies of scale, that cold spreadsheet term, become a psychological weapon. Those who can buy a lot, pay little. Those who can only buy a little, pay a lot. The game doesn't just punish a lack of money, it punishes a lack of margin. And the mind begins to adapt to this scenario like an animal learning to live in a small cage. It ceases to desire space. You start to normalize the expensive. You normalize the inflated prices at the corner store, the hidden interest in installment plans, the convenience fee that convinces no one. Little by little, the feeling of being exploited transforms into exhaustion. And exhaustion, as Machiavelli knew, is the antechamber of surrender. Because those who are too tired to do the math don't realize they are paying 3 times for the same good that others pay only once. There's also the almost cruel detail that poverty changes the physical landscape of your life. It's not just the value of the product, it's the journey to get it. While some drive to large shopping centers, you walk to the nearest market because the bus is expensive, because there's no time, because your body is already worn out. Geography becomes a cage. The neighborhood becomes a border. The street where you live defines the price of your survival. Machiavelli didn't talk about maps, but about territory. And here, the territory isn't a country, it's a city block. Amidst all this, a comfortable illusion is born that these are just details. Just paper, just food, just diapers. But the system thrives on details, not on big blows. It doesn't ruin you with one hit, it consumes you with thousands of invisible scratches. Each small, expensive purchase is a small strategic defeat. Each repeated week consolidates the habit of not planning, of just enduring. Have you ever found yourself mentally calculating the costs at the checkout, subtracting items from your cart as if tearing parts of yourself away? Have you ever traded the best for ITLL due for today? This silent humiliation doesn't show up on bank statements, but it profoundly marks how you see yourself. And Machiavelli would understand the effect this has on the soul when a person begins to negotiate their own dignity with themselves. Power has already won without needing to show its face. There's something almost mystical about this process. It's as if the money is seeping through cracks you can't see. It's not theft, it's erosion. It's not violence, it's wear and tear. You don't feel attacked, just too tired to react. The high price ceases to be an injustice and becomes a fact of life, like rain or heat. And it is at this point that the trap closes. Because those who live paying more for everything cannot create reserves. And those who do not create reserves never leave the place where everything is more expensive. Machiavelli would call this a circle of containment, a mechanism that keeps people at the exact level of fragility that makes them predictable. They do not revolt, they only adapt. But within this opaque routine there's an unsettling whisper, almost a call. The feeling that something doesn't add up, that the numbers never add up, that effort doesn't translate into progress. This discomfort is precious. It's the first crack in the wall. Because the most dangerous power is the one that goes unquestioned. And when you start to feel that paying a high price isn't normal, that always living on the edge isn't natural, you get closer to what Machiavelli valued most: the awareness of your own position in the game. You may not yet see the whole picture, but you're beginning to realize that you're not losing because of incompetence. You're losing because every everyday choice is being made on skewed ground. And this realization, though painful, is the spark that precedes every turning point. Because the moment you understand that even toilet paper carries a logic of domination, something inside you refuses to remain blind. And that's exactly where the game changes level. There comes a point where poverty ceases to be merely a lack of money and becomes an abusive relationship with the financial system itself. You no longer argue with it, you simply accept the rules as one accepts the weather. Machiavelli saw this type of submission as the most sophisticated form of control when the dominated no longer perceives the dominator. It is at this stage that the bank ceases to be an institution and becomes a psychological presence, an entity that dictates your behavior without ever actually appearing. You open your banking app with the same caution as someone walking on glass. Every notification is a veiled threat. It's not the big purchase that terrifies you, it's the small one, the forgotten subscription, the automatic debit you swore you canceled. The money doesn't disappear, it moves with mathematical cruelty. The system knows exactly where to tap, so you feel the blow most intensely at the moment when you are already vulnerable. You don't realize it, but your body reacts before your mind. Tense shoulders, shortness of breath, the urge to close the app before even understanding what happened. Machiavelli would say that power manifests itself first in muscles, then in reason. You don't think about the bank, you fear the bank. And those who fear don't govern, they obey. When was the last time you felt that money was working for you and not against you? When was the last time you opened your account and, instead of relief, felt only the weight of yet another round of survival? You're not just indebted in terms of numbers, but in terms of nerves. The debt doesn't reside in the bank statement, it resides in the racing heartbeat that accelerates when you see the balance. Every month, the system tests how much you can endure before giving in. And you give in, almost always, because the alternative is facing the unknown. Machiavelli taught that the fear of the uncertain is more powerful than any concrete threat. It's not the interest rate that controls you, it's the unpredictability. There's a silent theater unfolding when you go into overdraft. The bank doesn't call you by name, doesn't ask what happened. It simply applies an automatic penalty, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to charge 35 reis because you were 5 short. The official discourse calls this internal policy. Machiavelli would call it a ritual of power, a repeated gesture that reinforces hierarchy. The message is simple and brutal: if you stumble, you pay; if you're strong, you receive. And you start to accept it as part of life, as if the world really worked that way, as if it were normal to pay obscene interest for being weak. Injustice ceases to provoke outrage and becomes a given of reality, like the rain that wets everyone. This is the ultimate triumph of domination, when the victim defends the mechanism that oppresses them because they can no longer imagine an alternative. Have you ever mentally calculated how much you pay per year just to keep breathing within the system? Have you realized that the bank doesn't profit from your prosperity, but from your carelessness, your forgetfulness, your mistakes? What's most disturbing is that this model creates a distorted morality. People with money are labeled as organized. People without money are seen as irresponsible. But what actually changes isn't ethics, it's the margin for error. Those with savings can make mistakes without suffering consequences. Those living on the edge can never make mistakes. And when they do, the system acts like a predator that recognizes the scent of weakness. Machiavelli believed that all real power is built upon understanding the vulnerabilities of others. In this sense, a bank is not a company, it is an attentive reader of your flaws. It maps your delays, anticipates your mistakes, and transforms your anxiety into a source of profit. And it does this with the neutral appearance of an algorithm, as if there were no intention behind the machine. The result is that you end up living in a kind of permanent state of alert. You don't plan trips, you don't dream of big changes, you don't project the future. You only try to avoid the next impact. Life boils down to preventing the ground from giving way beneath your feet. Machiavelli would see this as the ideal condition for governing someone. An individual who doesn't think beyond the next day is incapable of threatening any structure. Have you ever wondered if your fatigue is purely physical or if it has been carefully cultivated by this environment? Have you considered that perhaps you are not exhausted because you work too much, but because you are constantly pressured to operate in crisis mode? And then, almost ironically, the system still blames you. It says you should have control, financial literacy, self-awareness. As if it were possible to make cold, hard decisions when fear lives in your pocket. This inversion of responsibility is the most Machiavellian move of all, transforming the effect into the cause, making you believe you are incompetent when in reality you are only reacting to a hostile structure. There's something almost hypnotic about this cycle. You promise yourself that next month you'll be more organized, that you'll pay more attention, that you'll anticipate things. But next month arrives with new emergencies, new small setbacks, new expenses you didn't see. The promise dissolves, and guilt accumulates like an invisible layer over your identity. Do you still believe that this dynamic is the result of bad luck or personal failings? Or are you beginning to realize that there's a design behind it, an exploitative architecture that feeds on your fatigue? Machiavelli never romanticized the struggle for power. He described it as it is cold, asymmetrical, and silent. And that's exactly how the financial system operates on those who have no margin. Not with shouts, but with numbers. Not with swords, but with notifications. And the more you ignore this logic, the more deeply it settles in your mind, shaping your limits, your fears, your perception of what is possible. But there is a crack in this domain, a point where control begins to fail. It emerges not when you make money, but when you understand the nature of the trap. Because power, as Machiavelli knew, depends less on the strength of the oppressor and more on the ignorance of the oppressed. And ignorance, once broken, is never fully restored. There comes a point where poverty ceases to be a financial condition and becomes a daily choreography, an invisible script you perform without realizing it. You wake up and the first decision isn't what you want to do with the day, but what you can prevent from getting worse. Machiavelli would understand this state as the perfect victory of the system when the individual not only obeys, but anticipates their own punishment. There's a curious fact that rarely appears in economic reports. In low-income neighborhoods, the average time spent on basic tasks like buying food, doing laundry, or handling banking issues is almost double that of wealthy neighborhoods. Not because people are slower, but because everything is further away, more bureaucratic, more fragmented. A simple day at the laundry consumes hours, money, travel, and queues. While someone with a washing machine at home takes 5 minutes to put their clothes in, you carry heavy bags to a bus stop, wait, pay for cycles that don't always work, and watch over your clothes as if you were guarding a treasure. Machiavelli would say that this theft of time is the most sophisticated form of taxation, because you don't realize you're paying with your own life. This waste accumulates in an almost comical way. There are stories of people who have to cross 3 neighborhoods to find a market with fair prices, spending more on transportation than they save on products. Others juggle extra shifts because the bank's hours coincide exactly with the only time they could rest. None of this appears as explicit oppression, but as a series of scattered obstacles that, added together, build a prison. Machiavelli understood that power doesn't need to build walls if it can make every step too tiring. What's most disturbing is that, in this environment, even healthy choices become luxuries. Cooking, for example, is sold as saving money, but it requires an efficient refrigerator, a working stove, ingredients bought in bulk, and, above all, time. For those who come home late from work and still need to take care of basic errands, fast food ceases to be an addiction and becomes a survival strategy. Machiavelli wouldn't see this as moral weakness, but as forced adaptation to a hostile environment. There is also the phenomenon of food scarcity zones, entire areas where there isn't a decent supermarket within a reasonable distance. What exists are convenience stores with inflated prices and products poor in nutrients. This means that even the body begins to reflect social position. You eat worse not because you chose to, but because you were pushed to. Power, in this case, not only manages your money, but shapes your health, your disposition, your longevity. It's a dominion that penetrates the skin. And while all this is happening, the dominant narrative insists on selling you the idea that all it takes is better organization. As if organization could negate geography, wasted time, and constant friction. Machiavelli would laugh at this naivete. For him, no virtue survives long when the terrain is hostile. Virtue needs structure to exist. Without it, it becomes merely exhaustion disguised as character. There are almost unbelievable accounts of people who, to save a few reis, walk kilometers with heavy bags because public transport doesn't serve that specific route. Others who miss medical appointments because the cost of travel exceeds the cost of the treatment itself. Each of these decisions seems small, but they all have the same effect: they reduce their scope of action, compressing their lives into ever smaller circles. Machiavelli understood that whoever controls the territory controls the future. And today, territory is not just land, but access. Access to markets, to services, to time, to silence. You live surrounded by subtle, almost polite barriers that don't prohibit, they only make things more difficult. And constant difficulty creates a specific type of human being, someone who doesn't plan, but only manages damage. The system also feeds on a cruel paradox. The poorer you are, the less your time is worth in the eyes of the market, but the more it is consumed by basic tasks. You work more hours, rest less, commute more, and get fewer things done. Machiavelli would call this a strategic inversion, transforming a person's scarcest resource, time, into the main tribute they pay. Amidst this machine, the individual begins to lose the ability to imagine a different life. Not for lack of dreams, but for lack of mental space. The future is reduced to the next bill, the next commute, the next logistical obstacle. And the strangest thing is that, seen from the outside, none of this seems dramatic. They are just small difficulties, one after the other, piled up until there's no air left. This is how poverty perpetuates itself, not only in one's pocket, but also in one's perception. You begin to measure the world by what you can reach on foot, by what fits into your exhausting day, by what doesn't threaten to shatter your fragile stability. Machiavelli would see in this shrinking of imagination the clearest sign that power has won when a person ceases to desire what was never offered to them. And yet, within this almost suffocating scenario, there are strange flashes, moments when injustice reveals itself so clearly that it hurts. Like when you realize that a washing machine would save you years of your life, but costs the equivalent of months of sacrifice. Or when you understand that what you lack is not strength, but room for maneuver. These moments are rare, but precious, because they break the spell of normality. Machiavelli knew that no domination is eternal when the dominated begin to see the structure behind the appearances. And perhaps the first step to breaking free from this choreography isn't making money, but recovering the sense that your life shouldn't be so difficult. Because the moment you recognize that constant friction isn't natural, but constructed, something inside you begins to move against the current. You begin to realize that the game is not only unfair, it's ingenious. It doesn't need visible villains or grand conspiracies. It simply leaves people at the exact level of vulnerability where they can't plan their next move. Machiavelli would understand this as the art of governing through exhaustion. One doesn't dominate through shock, but through repetition. This is where credit enters as both savior and tormentor. It appears when you need air, offering immediate relief, and charges interest that doesn't seem real until it becomes a permanent burden. The credit card becomes an extension of the body, an emotional prosthesis. It's not used for luxuries, but to plug holes: food at the end of the month, unexpected medicine, a bill that came in higher than expected. With each slip-up, the debt grows almost invisibly, like a silent tumor. There comes a precise moment when the credit card ceases to be a tool and becomes a shackle. You start paying only the minimum, convinced that you are in control of the situation. But Machiavelli would have already foreseen this. When a person can only pay to remain in debt, they have ceased to be an agent and have become territory. The system doesn't want you to pay off your debt, it wants you to remain trapped, predictable, domesticated. Then come the cruel twists and turns. One month you manage to keep everything in order. The next, a simple unforeseen event, a flat tire, a fever, a delay in salary, and the whole fragile structure crumbles. The limit is exceeded, the rate skyrockets. Your name threatens to be added to the negative credit register. Fear returns like an old acquaintance. Machiavelli would call this a loyalty test. The system measures how much you can endure before surrendering again. The most insidious thing is that each cycle teaches you to lower your expectations. You start to think it's normal to be in debt, normal to live in the red, normal to postpone dreams indefinitely. The internal narrative changes. It's no longer when I get better, I'll do this, but if it ever happens, who knows? That who knows is the sign that the will has been eroded. And for Machiavelli, an individual without a clear will has already been conquered. But there's an even deeper layer to this mechanism, something almost no one talks about. Credit doesn't just capture your money, it captures your identity. You start to define yourself by what you owe, by the available credit limit, by the score that appears on a cold screen. Your story becomes a number. You're no longer someone trying to get back on your feet, you're a risk profile. And when you see yourself that way, you start acting like one, avoiding bold moves, avoiding disruptions, avoiding anything that could break the suffocating routine. There are reports of people who hold on to jobs they hate for fear of losing their cell phone payments, car loans, or debt renegotiations. They don't stay because they want to, but because they can't leave. The system then doesn't need to imprison them, they imprison themselves. Machiavelli would describe this as the supreme victory of power, when the dominated defend their own cell because they believe it protects them. And just when you think things can't get any tighter, the game escalates. Rates adjust, deadlines shrink, tolerance disappears. A small debt snowballs, not because you don't want to pay, but because the cost of getting out is greater than staying. You feel surrounded by numbers that don't obey your logic, only theirs. At this point, something changes in your perspective. You begin to distrust not only companies, but yourself. You ask yourself where you went wrong, where you failed, where you were irresponsible. This guilt is the final ingredient. Machiavelli knew that guilt is more effective than force. Those who feel guilty don't rebel, they only correct themselves, trying to be better within a game that was born unequal. But then, almost by accident, you notice a detail that doesn't add up. You realize that the total amount paid for something, simply car, an appliance, a small loan, is absurdly higher than the real price. You mentally add up old installments and are shocked. It's not that you're paying too much. You're paying forever. This realization comes as a cold shock, a disruption in the automatic flow of survival. It is from this point that the internal rhythm begins to change. Fear still exists, but now it shares space with a new question: why does it work this way? Why does immediate relief always cost the entire future? This question is dangerous because it breaks the narrative of inevitability. Machiavelli would say that this is the moment when the dominated begin to study the dominator. You start noticing patterns where before you only saw chaos. Offers appear precisely when you're weak. Renegotiation emails arrive when the delay becomes a threat. The system doesn't react to your suffering, it anticipates it. And this anticipation reveals something uncomfortable: you're not a statistical accident. You're part of a model. The more you observe, the more the machinery is exposed. The credit card, the financing, the installment payments, everything seems different now. Not as help, but as an invitation to remain in the same place. And deep down, an almost subversive unease arises. What if the way out isn't to earn more, but to owe less? What if the power lies not in accumulating, but in escaping? This unease alone doesn't solve anything, but it changes everything. Because the game only continues as long as you believe there is no alternative. And the moment you begin to suspect that you are being kept exactly where you are, the tension shifts. It's no longer just the system against you. Now it's you against the entire logic that has sustained your life up to this point. And this is the kind of twist that Machiavelli would never ignore. You begin to realize that the game is not only unfair, it's ingenious. It doesn't need visible villains or grand conspiracies. It simply leaves people at the exact level of vulnerability where they can't plan their next move. Machiavelli would understand this as the art of governing through exhaustion. One doesn't dominate through shock, but through repetition. This is where credit enters as both savior and tormentor. It appears when you need air, offering immediate relief, and charges interest that doesn't seem real until it becomes a permanent burden. The credit card becomes an extension of the body, an emotional prosthesis. It's not used for luxuries, but to plug holes: food at the end of the month, unexpected medicine, a bill that came in higher than expected. With each slip-up, the debt grows almost invisibly, like a silent tumor. There comes a precise moment when the credit card ceases to be a tool and becomes a shackle. You start paying only the minimum, convinced that you are in control of the situation. But Machiavelli would have already foreseen this. When a person can only pay to remain in debt, they have ceased to be an agent and have become territory. The system doesn't want you to pay off your debt, it wants you to remain trapped, predictable, domesticated. Then come the cruel twists and turns. One month you manage to keep everything in order. The next, a simple unforeseen event, a flat tire, a fever, a delay in salary, and the whole fragile structure crumbles. The limit is exceeded, the rate skyrockets. Your name threatens to be added to the negative credit register. Fear returns like an old acquaintance. Machiavelli would call this a loyalty test. The system measures how much you can endure before surrendering again. The most insidious thing is that each cycle teaches you to lower your expectations. You start to think it's normal to be in debt, normal to live in the red, normal to postpone dreams indefinitely. The internal narrative changes. It's no longer when I get better, I'll do this, but if it ever happens, who knows? That who knows is the sign that the will has been eroded. And for Machiavelli, an individual without a clear will has already been conquered. But there's an even deeper layer to this mechanism, something almost no one talks about. Credit doesn't just capture your money, it captures your identity. You start to define yourself by what you owe, by the available credit limit, by the score that appears on a cold screen. Your story becomes a number. You're no longer someone trying to get back on your feet, you're a risk profile. And when you see yourself that way, you start acting like one, avoiding bold moves, avoiding disruptions, avoiding anything that could break the suffocating routine. There are reports of people who hold on to jobs they hate for fear of losing their cell phone payments, car loans, or debt renegotiations. They don't stay because they want to, but because they can't leave. The system then doesn't need to imprison them, they imprison themselves. Machiavelli would describe this as the supreme victory of power, when the dominated defend their own cell because they believe it protects them. And just when you think things can't get any tighter, the game escalates. Rates adjust, deadlines shrink, tolerance disappears. A small debt snowballs, not because you don't want to pay, but because the cost of getting out is greater than staying. You feel surrounded by numbers that don't obey your logic, only theirs. At this point, something changes in your perspective. You begin to distrust not only companies, but yourself. You ask yourself where you went wrong, where you failed, where you were irresponsible. This guilt is the final ingredient. Machiavelli knew that guilt is more effective than force. Those who feel guilty don't rebel, they only correct themselves, trying to be better within a game that was born unequal. But then, almost by accident, you notice a detail that doesn't add up. You realize that the total amount paid for something, simply car, an appliance, a small Loani, is absurdly higher than the real price. You mentally add up old installments and are shocked. It's not that you're paying too much. You're paying forever. This realization comes as a cold shock, a disruption in the automatic flow of survival. It is from this point that the internal rhythm begins to change. Fear still exists, but now it shares space with a new question: why does it work this way? Why does immediate relief always cost the entire future? This question is dangerous because it breaks the narrative of inevitability. Machiavelli would say that this is the moment when the dominated begin to study the dominator. You start noticing patterns where before you only saw chaos. Offers appear precisely when you're weak. Renegotiation emails arrive when the delay becomes a threat. The system doesn't react to your suffering, it anticipates it. And this anticipation reveals something uncomfortable: you're not a statistical accident. You're part of a model. The more you observe, the more the machinery is exposed. The credit card, the financing, the installment payments, everything seems different now, not as help, but as an invitation to remain in the same place. And deep down, an almost subversive unease arises. What if the way out isn't to earn more, but to owe less? What if the power lies not in accumulating, but in escaping? This unease alone doesn't solve anything, but it changes everything. Because the game only continues as long as you believe there is no alternative. And the moment you begin to suspect that you are being kept exactly where you are, the tension shifts. It's no longer just the system against you. Now it's you against the entire logic that has sustained your life up to this point. And this is the kind of twist that Machiavelli would never ignore. You've arrived here carrying much more than words. You carry the memory of each small daily defeat, each forgotten fee, each purchase made in haste, each night when a negative balance stole your sleep. And perhaps for the first time, you don't see all this as personal failings, but as pieces on a chessboard that has always been set up around you. Machiavelli would say that this is the moment when the veil falls, when the person ceases to be merely a player and begins to see the invisible rules that have shaped every step of their life. But seeing isn't enough. Knowledge that doesn't translate into action only increases frustration. The true end of this cycle isn't epic, quick, or glamorous. It begins with gestures that are almost ridiculously simple, yet carry a devastating power against the system. You won't win the game by trying to get rich first. You'll win it by creating space to breathe. This space is called margin. It's money that doesn't have an immediate purpose, that isn't promised to anyone, that isn't used to plug urgent holes. It may seem like little, but the first 500 or 1,000 reis saved isn't a reserve, it's a change of identity. They mark the transition from living reactively to starting to choose. When you have margin, an unforeseen event ceases to be a catastrophe. It becomes just another event in life. Machiavelli would understand this as repositioning. You move from the front line of the attack and climb a step in the invisible hierarchy. The path to building that margin doesn't involve magic formulas, but an inner battle against the logic that has imprisoned you until now. It's about learning to look at each expense not as a momentary comfort, but as a strategic decision. Ask yourself, every time you think about paying in installments, not how much you can afford each month, but how much it will cost you in terms of your freedom over the next few years. The system wants you to focus on the installment because the installment hides the total cost. You need to reverse this logic and see time as currency. There's something almost spiritual about cutting vampire costs, those small expenses that drain your energy without you realizing it. Forgotten subscriptions, silent fees, accrued interest. It's not about depriving yourself of everything. It's about choosing where your life will be drained and where it will be preserved. Every cancellation, every renegotiation, every debt paid off is not just financial relief, it's an act of psychological autonomy. You also need to change how you relate to discomfort. The temptation to use any leftover material to reward yourself is understandable after so much time in scarcity. But Machiavelli would never recommend using a moment of advantage to numb yourself. He would say to use this rare respite to strengthen your position. This means buying quality when you can, not for status, but to eliminate future problems. It means exchanging cheap, repetitive items for solid, lasting ones. It's the gradual replacement of survival with strategy. None of this happens in a month. The system wasn't built in a day, and you won't get out of it in one. But there's a silent effect that begins as soon as you accumulate small victories. Anxiety decreases. The mind clears. You start to see opportunities that were previously hidden by the noise of urgency. Suddenly, the future ceases to be an abstract concept and becomes something you can touch again. There's a very specific moment in this journey when you realize you're no longer just putting out fires. You start anticipating them. You see patterns in your own falls. You understand where you tend to stumble, where life tends to surprise you. And then you build simple defenses, a small reserve for medical emergencies, a separate amount for maintenance, a clear limit for impulsive spending. None of this is heroic, but all of it is revolutionary. Machiavelli wrote for rulers, but his most profound teaching wasn't about ruling over others, but rather about not being ruled by forces you don't understand. By understanding the game of poverty, you don't automatically become rich, but you cease to be easy prey. You exchange the role of extra for that of observer. And those who observe eventually intervene. Perhaps you're still far from where you'd like to be. Perhaps the debt still weighs heavily, the salary is still low, the margin still non-existent. But now you have something you didn't have before: clarity. You know that every small decision carries an invisible cost, but also a possibility of disruption. You're no longer fighting in the dark. And that's why this story doesn't end with technical advice, but with a personal invitation. Start today, not with grand promises, but with a concrete action. Choose a leak to stop, a cost to eliminate, a debt to tackle, a sum, however small, to separate and not touch. This small act is your declaration of war on the system that has kept you trapped for so long. If you felt something different listening to this, if you realized you've been paying an invisible tax without even knowing it, share this video with someone who needs to see what you saw. Like, comment, even anonymously, about the biggest hidden cost you've discovered in your own life, and subscribe to the channel. Because from now on, we're not going to talk about luck or misfortune anymore. We're going to continue unraveling the invisible games that shape the world and learn, together, to play differently.